All right, let's talk about a tool that's way more powerful than any app on your phone, and honestly, more clarifying than just about any self-help book out there. It's something we all have, but most of us have kind of learned to be afraid of it. We're talking about silence, and we're going to explore how to use it like a precision instrument, you might even say like a scalpel for the soul.
I mean, really think about it for a second. The moment you're in a line, or just sitting in your car, what's the first thing you do? Yep, you reach for the phone. Any little gap in a conversation, and we rush to fill it with, well, with anything. We live in a world that basically treats silence like it's a mistake. You know, like a technical glitch that we have to fix immediately with more noise. But why? What are we so desperate not to hear when things get quiet?
Well, here's why. Because when all that other noise finally stops, this voice starts talking. The ego. And a great way to think of it is like that roommate you just can't get rid of. It's loud, it's constantly demanding your attention, it needs validation for everything, and it will not stop narrating your entire life. It's the whole performance of being you, and let's be honest, it's exhausting. And silence is threatening because it's the one thing that roommate absolutely cannot stand.
So what do we do about all this internal noise? Well, the good news is we don't have to invent some brand new solution. We can actually look back to two ancient groups who became the world's foremost experts in using silence to get right to the root of the problem. You could call them the original professional wall starers.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. On one side, you've got the Desert Fathers out in the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert way back in the 4th century. And on the other, you have Zen monks in these cold, superstructured monasteries in medieval Japan. I mean, we're talking scorpions versus cushions. But look closer. They both understood that to get to their ultimate goal, whether that's finding God or realizing emptiness, they had to use silence as a scalpel to cut away the ego.
So let's start with the Desert Fathers. For guys like Abba Anthony, walking out into the desert wasn't just, a change of scenery. It was like they were intentionally walking into a psychological laboratory. When you strip away every single distraction, every person, every comfort, you're left with absolutely nothing but yourself. And that is when the real work begins.
These fathers even had a name for all that chatter from the ego, logismoi. These are those intrusive thoughts, the daydreams, the constant self-justifications, the whole narrative. And they had this incredible insight. The ego is a performer. It survives on an audience. It needs someone to get validation from. So by going into total isolation, they basically put the ego on a starvation diet. When there's no one around to impress, the ego starts to wither away.
This quote from Abba Arsenius just nails their whole philosophy. But it's more than just a clever little saying. It's a clinical strategy. In modern therapy terms, what they were doing was a form of radical exposure therapy. They were forcing themselves to sit with the one thing they feared the most, their own inner chaos, without having anyone else to blame it on.
Okay, so let's jump from the hot desert over to our second group of experts. In a Japanese zendo, the environment couldn't be more different. It's cold, it's disciplined, it's very structured, but the target is exactly the same. You see, Zen isn't about relaxation. If you want to relax, you take a nice hot bath. Zen is about what they call the Great Death, which is the death of the ego.
From the Zen point of view, the ego isn't even a real thing. It's a phantom. It's just a collection of stories that we tell ourselves over and over. I'm a success. I'm a failure. I'm smarter than them. They're better than me. The whole practice of zazen, or seated meditation, is really just to sit in silence. And that silence acts like a mirror. When you stare into that mirror long enough, you start to see just how flimsy and totally made up all of those stories really are.
And this leads us to this really fascinating and frankly deeply counterintuitive Zen idea, Mushatoku. Our egos are obsessed with goals, right? I mean, even when we meditate, the ego wants to win at being mindful. It wants to be the best at being calm. Zen just flips that whole table over. It says, just sit. Don't try to be enlightened. Don't try to be anything. The goal is to have no goal. Because when you finally stop trying to be someone, the real you finally has some space to show up.
Okay, so how do we take all this ancient wisdom and actually use it in our crazy modern lives? Well, here's a powerful way to think about it. The ego is like a protective callus that grows over our emotional wounds. It's there to keep us from feeling pain, sure, but eventually it gets so thick that we can't feel joy or real connection either. Silence is the scalpel that can carefully, precisely cut through that callus.
Silence really works in 3 key ways. First, it just dismantles all those stories we tell ourselves. Second, it builds what's called affect tolerance. It sounds really clinical, but all it means is the ability to sit with uncomfortable feelings, like anxiety or boredom, without totally panicking and grabbing your phone. And third, it creates space for what you might call the other. Call it God, your true self, the universe, whatever. It's that quiet voice that you can only hear when the ego finally shuts up for a minute.
Okay, hold on. I can just hear what you might be thinking right now. A desert father wants to find God. A Zen monk wants to realize emptiness. I mean, those sound like complete opposites, right? How can both of these paths possibly be right?
And here is the secret. They are two different ways of describing the exact same process. You see, real spiritual growth is a subtraction, not an addition. It's not about learning more life hacks or adding new beliefs. It's about letting go of the heavy luggage of the ego. The desert father empties himself to be filled by God. The Zen monk empties himself to realize he was never separate from the universe to begin with. Both paths are about emptying out.
Now look, this does not mean you need to book a one-way flight to a cave in Egypt. The real power of this practice is that it's scalable. We can apply this exact same principle right here, right now, in our own lives with a really simple challenge.
So here it is. I call it the micro-silence challenge. The next time you get home, before you hop out of your car, just stop. Turn off the engine, turn off the radio, the podcast, put your phone down, and just sit there for 3 minutes. That is it. Don't try to meditate, don't try to do anything, just be.
Now, I'm going to warn you, your ego will scream. It is going to tell you this is a colossal waste of time. It's going to bring up something embarrassing you said 5 years ago. It will do absolutely anything to get you to pick up that phone. And your job is to just sit there and let it happen. Let the silence bite. Because that feeling of discomfort, that's the feeling of the scalpel doing its work. And right on the other side of that bite is a version of you that is genuinely and truly free.